maybe it was just a coincidence, but I've found in life that these coincidences keep happening when you keep praying.
Welcome back to Life Explore podcast. In this episode, we're going to be continuing our interview with Pam Jones. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, so you mentioned the NISCU, and you were, when you joined that, you cheekily admitted to praying for a laptop, and
I did.
Your prayers were answered. You received a MacBook when you took on the role.
It was the first day on the job, and the managing trustee said, "Pam, you're going to need a laptop. Will a MacBook do?"
Yeah.
And I'm not somebody who often prays for stuff, because stuff isn't all that important. It was a means to an end, because I wanted to do some writing and things. I never imagined that 17 years later it would be like dozens of policies that I would have written, but that was my introduction to owning a laptop.
So what's another seemingly small specific prayer that God has answered in a surprisingly direct way?
One of the biggest surprises in my life, and this goes back to failure. Is that okay to go back to that?
Yeah.
At this
Go
stage,
ahead, yeah.
Because as I said before, I was not very good at exams, and all through university life, I would get firsts and 2-1s in coursework, no problem, and I would get anything between thirds and a failure in exams, and so came the scary moment when I had to do finals, and I was quite worried about it because I knew I just really wasn't very good at exams. And a friend at church said to me, "Pam, give me your exam timetable. I am going to pray for you for the whole 3 hours of every exam that you're sitting." So I gave her my exam timetable. And then when it got to the day before results day, I found out that I was being vivaed. So I'd been one of the few who were picked out to have an oral exam with the examiner, the external examiner. So I sat down and he raised a particular essay I'd written on my finals exams. And I always remember, don't ask me what the connection was because I cannot remember now, but I always remember starting talking about insect herbivory and we ended up talking about racehorses. Now, how that happened, I have no idea. But anyway, you've probably figured by now that I can talk for England, or Wales even. So, having this, this oral exam with the external examiner didn't actually faze me. And then results came out the next day and I got a 2-1. And I was absolutely ecstatic. And then I had to go for my results breakdown with the course tutor. And the course tutor, as I walked in the room, said, "Of course, you do realise that you did so well on all of your finals that we thought you cheated." And I was like, "Oh," she said, "that's why you had a viva." But the external examiner was perfectly happy that it was a real result. So we've let you have your 2-1, but we want you to know that we will never, ever give you a reference to do research. Research was what I wanted to do.
Wow.
That was my dream.
Yeah.
Growing up as a teenager and all of that. Research was what I wanted to do. And in that, I went from being on a high, so I got a 2-1, to having my dream just taken from me.
Yeah.
Because they thought I cheated, even though I hadn't. And then they decided, and so I had to go with plan B, which was to go, and I trained as a school teacher. And I spent a year in London. And for a country girl from the north of England, let me tell you that a year in London is 11 and a half months too long.
I agree with that. I spent far too long in London as well.
But I did my PGCE. It was hard work. The course was great. The college was great. The teaching practice school was absolutely awful. And the college said, "We'll never use that school ever again." So it was tough. And it was really right towards the end where I decided that I really would go into teaching. And the course tutor set me up with some supply work too. He said, "You need your confidence rebuilding." So I came through that feeling at rock bottom for many reasons. And I remember being in my little room in Willesden Green in London, spreading a world map on the bed and saying to God, God, I will go anywhere so long as it's not London. And I felt a real sense of, go back to Lancaster. And I thought, well, that can't be true, can it? Because Christians don't get told to do what they want to do. They always get told to do something that's really hard and challenging.
You wanted to go back to Lancaster.
So,
You had that in your...
The very next day, I got a letter from the man who was the elder of the Covenant Ministries Church in Lancaster, as it became, in Lancaster, a man called Frank Douthwaite, and probably it was his wife Judy that wrote it. Actually, Frank didn't really write things, but I got this letter saying, Pam, we've been praying for you and we really feel you ought to come back to Lancaster. And that was the very next day after me praying that prayer. And then shortly after that, a job came up, but it wasn't in Lancaster, it was in Blackpool, honestly, not my favourite place. Shall I, shan't I? But it was the only job in the area, so I applied for it. And it was a job for a general science teacher. I got the job, possibly because I was the only interviewee. So we're not talking high state, we're not talking high achievement here. We're talking getting in by the skin of your teeth.
Yeah.
But Blackpool was commutable from Lancaster. But again, I felt this sense of God saying, you're going to have a job in Lancaster and it's going to surprise you. So, okay. My teaching career lasted for 3 years. And the third year was an immense battle because I developed a degenerative disease of the cornea called keratoconus, where the cornea thins and it becomes, instead of spherical, it becomes rugby ball shaped. And the treatment, there are other treatments now, but in those days, we're talking 30 years ago, the treatments were, you had to wear hard contact lenses, but because of the very nature of the condition, hard contact lenses were incredibly difficult and uncomfortable to wear. And I'd only been wearing them for a few months when I developed a really deep-seated infection of the cornea, not just, how painful conjunctivitis can be, times that by about 1 million. And for about 9 months, I was in utter agony with this infection of the cornea in both eyes. One eye clouded up completely. The consultant said, I don't think that one's ever going to recover. We'll concentrate on trying to save the other one. So it was quite a tough time in many respects. Couldn't stand any light at all. I had to sit in a darkened room. If I went out of the house, I had to wear dark ski goggles just to be able to cope with the light going out of the house. People in the church were brilliant. They so looked after me. Just amazing. And one lady took me shopping in Sainsbury's. She said, what do you need? I said, I need some frozen peas. She said, what sort would you like? I said, those will do. She said, Pam, those are beans. So this was the situation that we were in,
Yeah.
After about 6 months of being basically blind, I woke up in the middle of the night. Usually I go to bed and I sleep, that's it, I woke up in the middle of the night and I just felt this real sense of, I'm going to be healed. And I felt it so strongly that when I woke up in the morning, I was actually disappointed that I wasn't completely better. And waking up in the morning was not a great experience because the sticky residue would, tell me if this is TMI.
No, go ahead.
But the sticky residue would literally stick my eyelids to my eyeballs. So when I was opening my eyes, it was literally like stripping an elastoplast off your eyeball.
I know the feeling. I've had, I sometimes wake up and recently, and I've been having one of my eyes, one or the other, it feels like I've got stabbing pain.
Yeah.
And I think it's like maybe when it's dried out or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, that's...
But anyway, so, I woke up in the morning. But from that day onwards, every single day it was a bit better. It took about 3 months. And even the eye that the consultant had said, don't think you're going to get that one back,
Yeah. Wow.
cleared up.
Yeah.
And so I went back to work. I'm mad. The one eye very quickly started to flare up again. And chalk dust was a problem. And wearing hard contact lenses, it was not a good environment. And the one eye started, and I had to wear a patch. And you know what kids are like, secondary school, walking through.
Yeah, but with a pirate or
and I'd get aye, captain. So I thought, well, there's two ways you can play this. You can either get really upset with them, or you can just go along with
it. Yeah.
So the same friend who said those aren't peas, they're beans. She lent me a puppet parrot with a squeak in its beak. Yeah. So every time I heard "Aye, Captain" when I was walking up the corridor, I'd squeak this parrot at them. And it didn't take very long at all for them just to
I bet the kids
just to take it all in good part.
I bet the kids will. I tell you what, the best teachers you can remember are the ones who you could just have a bit of fun with and a joke, you know.
Yeah. So, but it became very clear that teaching was not going to be the career for me anymore, and I had to leave. In fact, they gave me early retirement on the grounds of ill health at the grand old age of 27.
Wow.
I have been drawing that pension ever since.
It's like a footballer.
It's a pittance. It's what they used to call pin money.
Yeah.
But it's a blessing as well. So, but it was I lasted up till the end of the term, and it was the Christmas holidays, and I finished, and I came home, came into the house, and I thought, well, here I am. I've no job. I've no idea what I'm going to do. I've got a mortgage to pay. I really don't know what's going to happen. Went to put the washing machine on and it conked out. And that is significant because, so the next morning, Saturday morning, piles all my stuff in a bag, go down to the laundrette at the bottom of the hill where I lived, went into the laundrette, put the stuff in. I thought, oh no, I've forgotten to bring a book to read. I'm going to be here for about 3 hours waiting for this lot to do. And nothing, I'm just going to be twiddling my thumbs. So I had a look around, and that somebody left a Guardian newspaper open at the jobs page on top of the washing machine. And I looked, and immediately this tiny little advert in the middle of the page leapt out at me. Master's degree in biotechnology, government skills or area, all expenses paid. Within the week, I'd got on the course. And that was tuition fees paid. It was at what was then called Preston Polytechnic, and more recently has been known as the University of Central Lancashire. But it was course fees paid, travel expenses paid, income support, and housing benefit to cover your mortgage. Just like that. I mean, maybe it was just a coincidence, but I found in life that these coincidences keep happening when you keep praying. So that was Christmas holidays, and beginning of January, I started this master's degree in biotechnology. And they said as part of the course, you have to do 6 months industrial placement and a 3-month industrial placement and a 6-month research project. And we prefer you to do the whole kind of 9 months in the same place. Well, my industrial placement was on Lake Windermere.
Nice.
So I spent 9 months of my 12-month course in the Freshwater Biological Association right on Windermere, with a place called Ferry House on Windermere. So work started on the 8:30 ferry and finished on the 4 o'clock ferry. And it was just the most wonderful. I had a ball for the whole year. Evolution of plasmids, in case you're interested, but you're probably not. And I had a wonderful, wonderful time. And just a few weeks into that course, the course leader, a lady called Hilary, said to me, Pam, I've got a colleague at Lancaster University in the Biological Sciences department. He needs a PhD student, and I've told him that I've got a student that has all the skills that he's looking for. Would you be interested? I said, yes, I would be interested. So she sent me to see Professor Alan Welburn, a plant biochemist, working in the areas of air pollution and climate change. So I went to see him, and after about a 5 minutes chat, he said, oh, here's the form, sign here. So I had the studentship and the PhD place back at the institute that said, we will never give you a reference to do research.
That's pretty awesome, isn't it? I there's a lot in that story you just told, and there's like these.
There's a lot.
I'm trying to think like, oh man, I need to go over some of that again. But there was something that struck me, which was I felt very much came to mind was the story of Joseph.
Yeah.
Joseph.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what there was something that came out from your the earlier part of your story there, where it was where you had achieved you'd got your 2-1 and you passed that exam, but they accused you of cheating effectively.
Yeah.
Right. And I think also you didn't mention it, but I think you had somebody pray for you, didn't you? You were struggling and you weren't doing very well in these exams.
Yeah.
You'd failed your A levels as well, and so you kind of had obviously it wasn't working, and then but you had these exams to do, and you went and somebody prayed for you, right? And you just kind of laid them out, and you said, here's what was it, my exam questions, or here's my notes, study notes or whatever, and a friend prayed for you, and then you went into those exams and then just passed them, and you got
I got 2 1s in every exam.
2 1s.
I've never done that.
And that was, and so all your tutors were looking at that and going, this is not.
Let me the last final exam you did was the general paper, and you had to write 1 essay, and they gave you 3 hours to do it. But it could be a question about anything about absolutely everything in biology. So it was completely random. Now, in the run-up to finals, and you're all scurrying around, making sure you've got all the essays submitted that you need to, and I thought, I'm 1 short. So I wrote this essay on colour in nature, and I submitted it, and it came back, and I got a first in it. But the tutor said, I don't know why you wrote this, because you'd done all your essays. You didn't need to do this. And I thought, well, that was a waste. Do you know what the question was on the general paper? Like, there was lots of questions, but the question was colour in nature. It's just, you couldn't make it up, could you? And half an hour later, I was just, it was so fresh in my mind. I just scribbled it all down. And half an hour later, I was the first person. You could walk out once you'd finished. You didn't have to wait for the whole 3 hours. So after half an hour, I walked out. And all my friends were thinking, oh no, she's really blown it. She's just walked out. But I hadn't. It was because it was a gift.
And that's why it just comes to me, this story of Joseph, because it's Joseph, I think the same was, he seemed to be successful in whatever he was put in, but he got so high in Potiphar's house, and then there was this moment of his brother's wife coming along and got him in trouble when he went into prison. And in a way, I feel like your story seems to echo of that kind of like doing too well, being too successful, that got you into trouble. And then you had to kind of settle for and end up going to Lancaster instead, and making your way, but again, rising to the top. I mean, you did all these different studies and degrees that I'm sure somebody who knew you during the time of your A levels would never imagine you doing a master's and PhD and so on. And then there's this the final sort of, as Joseph's coming back and being in control of everything in Egypt. There's an element of you coming back to that institute that had sort of, we're never going to fund your research, and
Yeah.
you've come back into that, you know, and been a
I
blessing.
did 3 years studentship, no, my PhD, towards the end of which I met David for the first time. David and I hit it off
your
very
husband,
quickly.
David. Yeah.
No,
No, sorry.
David and I were both stewards at a Bible week, and
Yeah.
that's where we met. And he said to me, your husband must be a very lucky man.
Oh.
And I said, I don't have a husband. He said, would you like to go for a coffee? And he went away from that Bible week thinking, there might be something in this. And I went away from that Bible week planning the colour of the flowers. I think it's where Nathan gets his decisiveness from. And so that was like the August, and it was coming up to New Year. And he said, I want to propose, but I'm not proposing until you've submitted your PhD thesis. What a motivation that was. So I duly submitted, sort of pretty much bang on 3 years. And David proposed, and we got married the May after. But in the meantime, in fact, right from my first year, my PhD, I knew I was going to have a postdoc, because they said, we've got another 3 years money. We want you to stay on and do postdoc. So I had a postdoctoral fellowship to follow straight on. So I don't get jobs the normal route, me.
That's fantastic. I think it's very encouraging. It really is very encouraging to hear a story like that. So actually, just leading on to that. So despite holding, you know, all these credentials, multiple degrees, you often refer to yourself as not an intellectual. So what do you think is the most significant difference between someone who is an intellectual and someone who's simply awkward and always asking questions?
I think what I mean by that, you can get people who sit in ivory towers and don't really touch real life very much, and are so, if I can put it this way, highfalutin in how they communicate, that people on their own level get them, but ordinary people don't. And I tend to think of myself more as an ordinary person who's been very blessed by God and has managed to do well because I've been blessed, but I'm actually just a very ordinary person with a very extraordinary God, rather than being in that very high, rarefied academic kind of atmosphere, really. So I'm a very practical person. I'm, you know, sort of feet very much on the ground. And when the decision came, when David and I were discussing, we've been married 3 years, we were wanting to start a family, and at the same time my eyesight problems had flared up again, and to cut a long story short, I ended up having cornea transplants. So in the midst of all that, what's the future going to hold? Well, let's start a family, and I will be, you know, a stay-at-home mum. And I think if I'd been that high-flying academic type in that sense, I think that would have been a very hard decision. But because I was a very practical person, I'm much more of a people person. I like being around people. I think relationships are far more important than intellectual knowledge or whatever. And so it wasn't actually that difficult of a decision. And that hence for the next 10 years, I was a stay-at-home mum. I did pastoral work in the church, did a bit of admin on the side, whatever needed doing, really. I was quite happy and willing to do it. But I have to say, for our family, that 10 years was again, it was just a gift, because it meant we were able to raise a son in a very secure kind of family unit. He felt secure. I think he did anyway. You better ask him that. But, you know, we enjoyed his childhood. Fairly early on, I realised you can be chasing after all the milestones when you're raising your children. You know, when they start to speak and when they start to walk, and you're trying to push them into these. And all of a sudden I realised, why am I wishing his life away? Just chill, relax, and just enjoy each moment as it comes. And you don't need to push them in that sense. You just enjoy every stage just as it comes.
So you didn't feel like you didn't want to, you know, drive him into being an academic or anything like that?
I tried to interest him in things, but not through pushing him, but more by giving him opportunities to be interested.
Yeah.
So here's a story, you know, like Sunday school walk. To keep the kids interested on the walk, we'll set them a little challenge to write down a list of all the living things that they see. And so all the kids were coming with about 5 things on their list, you know, person, dog, sheep.
Yeah.
We had 120 on ours because we were going lifting rocks and looking in streams and, you know, lifting leaves up and finding the spittlebugs and just, you know, I think we even found a fossil, you know, just, yeah. So just,
the teachers must have just been like, what have we got here? You know, this is...
So it was like, but you know what? He didn't take with him because he didn't end up. But I tell you what I did do, though. Introduced him to Star Trek.
And that seemed to take hold.
And that, well, not only does he still like his Star Trek, but it wasn't about that so much. It was the fact that it enthused him with technical things. He developed this interest in technical things. And going through school, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, going through school, he had his own struggles because he had some kind of, whether it was a very mild form of dyspraxia or whatever, we never sought a diagnosis. We didn't think that was terribly important. But what we wanted to do was just help him as much as we could. And all through school, he couldn't write. He couldn't. He did not have sufficient fine motor control over his pencil, and he couldn't write properly. He did writing courses, and we did extra homework, and we did the whole thing, and none of it worked. But what did work, we had an old computer. We were buying ourselves a new Mac, and we said, "You can have the old computer. Do whatever you like." We thought it would last about a week before. Do you know what? That computer's still going strong because he kept replacing bits and doing, and he learned how the thing worked. He could take it apart. He could upgrade it. He put in different operating systems. He learned a bit of Linux. It enthused him, and it was all part and parcel. It all started with having an interest in Star Trek and realising science is really quite cool.
Yeah, technology.
But then going from that and then going into high school, and they said, "Why is he not using a keyboard?" And we were like, "Can you do that? Here's a keyboard," like instantly. And he went all through school with a netbook in his instead of books. Did everything on a keyboard, and he just learned all these technical skills. And then when a guy came to do a video for the church, a promotional video, he had an inset day, and he said, "Oh, can I go around with you? Can I shadow you for the day?" And that sparked his interest in filmmaking. I believe the rest is history.
The rest is history. Well, we'll probably have an episode with Nathan as well, so he'll get to tell his side of the story. But it's very interesting. I will definitely probably drill you for some bit more intel. So changing the gear a bit, you have also actively participated in street pastors.
Yeah.
And you highlight the impact of small acts of kindness. So would you be able to share a brief story of seemingly insignificant interaction that had surprisingly profound impact on you or someone else?
Yeah. I think probably my favourite story, because I think it illustrates something about how Christians can be salt and light. And we were out street pastoring, so it would have been either very late Saturday night, very early Sunday morning. Never preach the day after you've been on street pastors, because that's not a good idea. But we were walking the street, so we were walking up the street. There was this man laid out on the street corner by this building underneath a gutter, and the gutter was dripping disgusting icy cold water on him. People were just walking straight past. Nobody wanted to help this man, drunk. Nobody wanted to help him. But as street pastors, that's why we were there. So we went up and we started to put this man into the recovery position. We moved him away from being under the dripping gutter. We'd no sooner approached him and begun to help this man than all of a sudden there's a crowd of people around us. All of a sudden, all those people walking past didn't want to stop. So felt empowered. So one of them was like, "I'm a trainee doctor, let me check him over." Another one was like, "I'm a nurse, let me help you." and suddenly all these people are around you. And I just learned from that experience. It just needs one person to step forward and begin to help. And it's that sense of empowerment of other people who don't quite know how to cross that boundary to actually start to help somebody. But once they see somebody else doing it, they're actually really willing to come alongside.
Yeah, bystander effect, right? Is they say the bystander effect is where if there's something happening in a public place, there's this idea that people are expecting someone else to do something, and they're too paralyzed to do something themselves. And I've heard one of the ways to counter that actually is, in the one sense, one is if somebody takes action, that can help, that can affect other people to do something. But also, if you're ever in a situation like that, if you're in a situation where you need help to do something or deal with a situation like that, the best thing to do is rather than calling out and saying, someone help me, or someone help do this, someone call 999, what you should do is actually pick people.
Yep.
And I've heard, what rather than call out and say, can somebody call 999, just pick somebody out of the crowd and say, you can you call 999? Yep. Can you help me lift this person? Can you, and there's this element of the bystander effect is, and to be honest, we've all done it, and I've done it. You step back and you're like, okay, I'll let somebody else deal with that. But there is this element of like, well, I don't know what to do, in this scenario. But if you start giving people tasks, they'll respond to it because you've pointed something out to them, as opposed to just waiting for somebody to make a decision.
Works in churches. If you stand up in front and you say, we need volunteers to get involved in children's work, nobody will come forward.
Yeah.
But if you go around after, if you say that, but then go around after the meeting and say, so-and-so, Fred, I think you'd be really good at this. Why don't you give it a go?
Yeah.
Why don't you come in a session and, see what it's like?
Honestly, I have been press ganged into so many volunteer situations through. Now I'm a little bit more guarded. But I used to be in church, I'd be like, you'd be good at that. Yeah. Oh, would I? Okay. But also, I think that's a good, I think there's an element of, there's a spiritual element in there of identifying people with certain gifts, but they need a bit of a push, or they need a bit of a, so I think you're right. I think if you can identify people with spiritual gifts, a spiritual gifting, but maybe they're not making use of it, maybe they don't see it themselves, why not just prompt them and say, hey, you seem to be very good at this, you seem to be very gifted in this area.
And the other key is providing the opportunities, a little bit really in the sense of how we raised Nathan, not by pushing him into things, but simply by opening up opportunities for him to have a go at things and finding for himself what he liked and what he was enthusiastic about, and what he was gifted in, which turned out to be technology. And how that happened for me and David, I have no idea, because neither of us are remotely technical. But that's another story. But in our discipleship, we need to give young people opportunities. So, for example, in our church, we've got teachers coming out of our ears and preachers. Why is that? Because in the silly season in the summer, when there's less at stake because lots of people are on holiday and things like that, a lot of coming and going. That's the season when we say to the young people, right, you're preaching on Sunday. Right, now come alongside, we'll help you prepare, we'll top and tail it for you. We can team teach it, or, how do you feel most comfortable? Yeah, but it's that opportunity. Yeah. We've discovered so many really gifted people, not necessarily in teaching and preaching, but in evangelism and in all different kind of ways of ministering by putting them up there and giving them the opportunity to do something, and it unlocks something for them. And then they find out what they enjoy, what they're good at, what they're gifted in, and they begin to develop. And then they understand a little bit about, this is what I need to study, or this is what I need to look at. This is the mentor I need. that kind of thing in order to take that kind of seed, if you like, and make it, flourish and grow. And in our church on an average Sunday, there's probably at least 3 people that are out, in other churches locally, preaching and teaching in other churches, either in the morning or the evening or whatever. Sometimes as many as 5 can be, out and about, which is a lovely influence. We're a small church in our area, but it's a lovely influence to have. But I think, 10 out of 10 to our pastor for, having the courage really to provide that opportunity for people to step up like that.
What would you say to someone who's in a church and they feel they have a gifting towards something, but they're not seeing an opportunity, or they're feeling like there isn't a ministry that exists for this, or they're not feeling like they're getting that chance to use that gifting?
Number one, are they serving? It's no good coming and saying, I think I've got a preaching gift, if you're not willing to serve coffee or whatever it is. And so there has to be a heart attitude of, I'm prepared to serve, because actually this isn't about me. This is about blessing other people. And I think another thing that I would think about is, not all gifting is worked out in the church context. A lot of gifting, in fact, it should be really that most gifting should actually be worked out there, because otherwise how do we,
like with the street
how
pastors,
do we reach people? How do we grow the church if we're not out there, with the gifting that the Holy Spirit's given us? Because the Holy Spirit has given us to be witnesses, not to be in the 4 walls of church, having, as a friend of mine once put it, tingles on our tangles. So I would probably say that as well. Are you looking for opportunities, in everyday life, just as you're walking down the street? I mean, Jesus said, go and make disciples. It was go and make. The imperative is first on the make. So it's as you're going, make disciples. Not, you've got to go to, across the other side of the world as a missionary to some place that you just desperately don't want to go to in order to fulfill that commission. No, you fill that commission every time you open your front door and step out into the street. So as you're going, make disciples, the person on the bus, the person in the shop, or use the same, forget the self-service things in Tesco's, go to a till and talk to a person and start, you'll see them again and again and again, and they get to know you, and, you start to build a bit of a relationship with people. And that's how you win people.
And there's so many people, I think, who, you might be the only person in their life who takes an interest in them and has some hope to give and offer, as opposed to what...
We've got an 80-year-old man in our church called Neil. Every Sunday morning, Neil goes up to 17-year-old Luke and says, how's your week been? And he sits, and they go and sit in a corner and they have a conversation every Sunday. That conversation has done Luke so much good. How much he has grown and developed and become more articulate and become more confident, because Neil, 80-year-old Neil, talk about multi-generational ministry. You don't need to start a charity. Just go to a teenager every Sunday morning and say, how's your week been?
Yeah, there's a guy in our church, actually, he's an older guy, and he goes, somehow he just has a connection with some of the young guys, and it's pretty amazing to watch. But he talks to everybody, and we'll probably try and fit him in at some point on a podcast as well. But I think I guess it's not even about having a gifting. It's like, just go and talk to people.
Yeah.
Just go speak to somebody and find out.
Being interested.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't take actually, any great... I've never thought of myself as being a gifted youth worker at all. But I can talk to people and they're just people. And, I don't always understand the language that they use.
Yeah.
like when I remember at school, oh, miss, you're really sick, Hugh. That was wicked.
Sick.
That.
Oh yeah, wicked sick. Yeah, yeah.
What are they
I think-
talking about?
I think those words now are not even.
No, because
No,
it
it's-
changes as often
I
as
don't
they
know what
change
the-
their socks, doesn't it?
Some of it
Yeah.
just sounds ridiculous now to me, but there's like, yeah, I can't even tell you what an example is of what the current lexicon is, but
I don't get it. I find, I don't find it easy or natural. But, a couple of weeks ago, there's a local high school in our town. It's a Church of England high school, thoroughly Christian school. And they put the whole of year 8 through Youth Alpha. And it sounds like, how do you get away with that? Actually, it's fine, because the whole idea of Youth Alpha is to present them with some ideas for them to think about,
yeah,
to consider, to ask questions about, and then ultimately to make their own mind up. It's not about coercing them into making a decision for Jesus or something like that.
yeah,
So they do Youth Alpha the whole of year 8, and towards the end of it, they have what they call a spirituality day. They bring the whole of year out out of school into 2 local churches. Whole pile of volunteers from local churches come on board, loads of us, and we all took 270 across two church halls, and we sit there and we do the Holy Spirit Day with them all. And
Wow. Don't know that,
the vast majority have no Christian background, so it's
what do they make of it?
and you get very little back from them. And I think this is a thing, isn't it, with young people? The reason we get intimidated as adults is we don't get much back from them. We don't really know what they're thinking, what's going on behind.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so you think it's just a black hole, isn't it? They're not really taking it, and you feel and you have to remember, it's not about me, it's about them.
Yeah.
So I'm with this group. So there's 7 or 8 in my little group that I'm looking after for the day. And we're going through all these different exercises and different things. And at the end of the day, they fill in a response card. And the kid sat next to me, who's hardly said a word to me all day, hands his response card to me. Do you know what it says on it? I found Jesus today. Please pray for me.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So it's almost like planting a seed, isn't it? And if you sit and you put the seed in the soil, and if you sit and watch, like, what's happening, where is it, and I think with teenagers, I mean, I've certainly noticed that is like sometimes, I haven't worked with teenagers for a while now, but I do recall, sometimes it feels like a black hole. It's like you're talking to them and it just goes in. It's like, are they listening? Did any of that kind of sink in? And then they'll come back up a bit later, and something that you've said, which you don't even think it had any impact at all, and there might be something profound comes out, and I remember you told me that, and like, oh wow, you ever picked that up? So what would you say to somebody who's in the church, who's a older generation, who's got no clue how to relate to kids in the church? What would you what tips would you give them?
Chocolate is good.
That works for everybody, right? Yeah.
But, it's just, actually young people get on pretty well with the oldest generation because they think it's like grandma and granddad.
Yeah.
And almost it's easier to get on with grandma and granddad they'll encourage your naughtiness, won't they? Because they just get to hand it back at the end. They're not. The parents feel this responsibility to discipline them and all that sort of thing, whatever. But grandparents are like, no, let's just have fun. And the older generation, just, you were children once. You were a teenager once. One of the things I think about teenagers, and I think in like Jewish family life, they got this. They have this thing called warriors in training. It was like a life kind of stage from, say, 10, 11 through to 30. Warriors in training, wits, as I like to say. And I used to think to myself, teenagers are like that. We think about teenage rebellion. What about we change that language? And instead of thinking about they're being rebellious, how about we think that these are young people who need to develop some muscle, some faith muscle, some muscle, metaphorically speaking, in how to do life. And that means dealing with conflict and all those kinds of things. Where do they feel safe to be in conflict? It's probably going to be in their family.
Yeah.
So rather than thinking about it as teenage rebellion, let's think about it as these are warriors in training. Let's teach them a few moves. And think of it in that kind of a way.
How to handle those situations of life that are going to come at them.
Exactly, because they're kind of practicing. That's actually, they may not think of it that way. They think they're having an argument with mum.
Yeah.
But actually what they're doing is they're learning how to handle conflict, how to deal with things that they're not happy about, how to deal with things they are happy about, which can be a equally tricky skill sometimes. And all those kinds of things, and rather than seeing this as a problem, actually see it as, a fertile kind of ground for growth, and see it that way. That's, yeah. And just change our mind. Well, that's quite a big biblical thing, isn't it? Change our mind about how we view these things. Instead of it being a problem, see it as an opportunity.
Well, on that, actually, and I want to circle that back round now to, back to yourself and on this subject of failure, because talking about being a young person and dealing with those struggles of life, A-levels, that type of thing. So you, in a recent sermon, you stated, like, my arrival at Lancaster wasn't because I was an intellectual, but because I was a failure, which you've talked about already in this last hour. But I think that's a really deep and personal statement, and I would wonder how that sort of has that shaped your life and your decisions moving forward, but also what you could share from that and from these challenges you've had going through it as a young person, facing the future of like, I've basically messed up my life, which I'm sure you felt at the time. For other people, young people find themselves in that situation as well.
I think a key thing for me, I went through a lot of life thinking I was second best because I always seemed to come second. When I did my master's in biotechnology, I missed getting a distinction by 1%. And that just seemed to sum me up. I did get my merit when I did the masters with you and in the missional leadership. I did get my merit. I was really chuffed with that. But it was always this sense of only just getting there, only just getting across the line. And that's kind of difficult. Maybe I'm just too much of a perfectionist, but I think some of it was all to do with being too concerned with what other people thought, being too concerned with comparing myself to other people. Who cares if you came second because there was 300 in the class, do you know what I mean? Just compare, always finding somebody who's better than you to compare yourself to. But actually, we're all completely unique. We've all got our own God-given gifts, our own combination of gifts. And it's not about, are you better at this? And it's about, are you faithfully discharging what God has put in your hand? And somewhere along the line, I kind of somehow managed to learn that faithfully discharging what God's put in my hand is far more important than just about anything else, really. I do teach and preach in the church. And you get people, some people, you never said this, you never said that, and you can feel, I failed. Or you get other people who come, that was wonderful, that was the best thing I've ever heard, that really moved me. As the famous preacher said, where did it move you to, We all know these old jokes. But actually, it's not about any of that. And, that, when people feedback and it's positive, it's very nice. But actually, the only thing that matters is, have I discharged what God gave me? And if I have, job done. And if I haven't, then where did I go wrong and how do I make sure I don't do that again? One of my biggest things is talking too much.
Perfect environment for that here. I wonder how. I imagine, and maybe I don't know you, but my thoughts are, I imagine when you did have some success, and I suppose where perhaps God provided something for you, through a failure, through the washing machine breakdown, sort of engineered this scenario where you wouldn't have seen this ad in this newspaper and everything.
Because I didn't take the Guardian paper.
Yeah.
Let me tell everybody, I do not take the Guardian newspaper.
No. But did you ever go through any periods of feeling imposter syndrome?
Feeling?
Imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Yeah.
And without wishing to be sexist about it, I think it's probably something that's quite common in women, especially women who are in leadership positions of one sort or another. We're always looking out over our shoulder, looking for the person who's going to find us out. How dare you talk about air pollution and climate change? Who do you think you are? And so, yes, I think that's I think it's quite common, particularly with women, but I think it's quite common in general, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that? Is that your next question? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you're in a good place to answer. I think you've accomplished a lot, and you maybe you have some
sometimes when I look back, I have to pinch myself. I've thoroughly enjoyed my life. Up to this point, I hope there's going to be a lot more of it, kind of thing. But I would just say I've had a very extraordinary, faithful God who's been on my case. And, I've had times when I've not done so well. And he's directed me and brought me back to where I've needed to be. That's just been, as somebody once said to me, you're not a failure, you're an overcomer. And I thought that really blessed me, that really encouraged me, actually. And I thought, I think there's probably some truth in that.
You can't really be an overcomer if you haven't got things to overcome. And so, in a way, sometimes God can either put obstacles or allow obstacles to occur because it's like he has to prove something. And if you've got it all easy, you're not really demonstrating the power of God at all.
And when I was in my darkened room in intense pain, thinking, I do not know what God is doing, and it came to me, it's for the glory of God. And that was it in a nutshell. And once I got that, it was like, well, do what you need to do, Lord, because it's for your glory. And one of the verses in Scripture that always really blessed me towards the end of the 4th chapter of, I can never remember if it's 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians. Sorry, Ewan. But it says, we set our sight not on things. Not on things that are seen, but things that are unseen. Because what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. These light and momentary troubles, that's what he says. Now, throughout the whole chapter, he's talked about he's been beaten up, he's been whipped, he's been stoned, he's been bitten by a snake, he's, all of these troubles.
We can't really complain, can we?
And then he says, these light and momentary troubles are achieving for us a glory that far outweighs them all. Because what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And that carried me through those particular health challenges. But I've come back to that over and over and over again through life. It's for his glory.
and especially, I think we're in a very privileged situation to be in this country where, I mean, obviously the climate is, you know, we do get I won't want to say persecution, but I think Christians do sometimes get mocked, or they get kind of,
Yeah.
there's sometimes certain actions by the government, you know, but I think when we're going through those troubles, to actually sort of, you know, to actually look at what Paul went through, to say, you know, these light and momentary troubles, you know, and maybe we need to, that's the way we need to approach it, is these light and momentary troubles. So I read the verse out from 2 Corinthians 4, verse 18. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Yeah, it's I think it's such a great verse to concentrate and focus on, especially if you're going through a bit of a difficulty. I think even now, teenagers are going to be doing their exams, and people are going to be doing university exams and stuff. And quite often you see, you know, when somebody's failed an exam, and when you're young, it's like, oh, I think my life's over.
Yeah.
But even in all sorts of things that are happening at home, and the feeling sometimes of not being privileged in society, the feeling like you've missed out on something, the feeling that, you know, either you've missed out for your own mistakes, or you've missed out just because you were not born in the right time, right place.
Or you've been dumped in Lancaster University instead of going to Nottingham.
There's always times, I think, where we face that. And I think the key thing is one, Christians feel that too sometimes. And two, it's something that's just everybody goes through at some level in life, and fixing our eyes on what is unseen, fixing our eyes on the goal is what is going to take you out of it, right?
Yeah,
like,
sounds like an Indiana Jones.
I'm trying to think. It was Indiana Jones. Something was coming to my mind like that, but I couldn't recall what it was. You know, so many things rattling around in there. But anyway, I mean, I think that's a good place for us to sort of. There's so much we could carry on talking about Star Trek versus Star Wars, but I think it's a good place for us to bring this to an end. Our last question then would be, 100 years from now, what is one thing that the generations of tomorrow can take away from the church of today?
I'll tell you what a very wise man told me at the very earliest days of my Christian life, and he said this: find out what God is doing in his kingdom and get in on it. And I think 100 years from now, people still need to be doing exactly that, finding out what God is doing in his kingdom and get in on it wholeheartedly.
I love that. That's really good. Well, thank you, Pam, for coming on the podcast. It's been absolutely amazing chat. Very much enjoyed it, and I hope people are very encouraged by it as well. I've found it very encouraging. Yeah. So
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get to have you back some point, you know, in the future as well. We hope you've enjoyed watching or listening to this episode. If you have any thoughts about the topics from this episode, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to the team. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe wherever you're joining us from, so you won't miss the next episode. We appreciate you listening in and look forward to bringing you more content through Life Explored. Bye for now.